Okay, let's dive right into this feeling of being set up to fail at work, specifically in South Africa. I mean, it's a tough one, right? It's like all this hard work you're putting in, and it's just not getting you anywhere. And you sent us some really interesting stuff that points to exactly that.
It really does, and it actually connects with something called the setup to fail syndrome, which the Harvard Business Review talks about. And it basically comes down to this. If managers have low expectations of someone, it can create this like vicious cycle, you know?
Yeah.
The employee doesn't perform well, which then just feeds right back into those low expectations. Even little mistakes early on can set it off.
Yeah, I can see that happening. And it's especially thinking about the situation here in South Africa, right? We've got this strong labor laws all about fairness and equity, plus such a diverse mix of cultures. It feels like that experience of being set up or unfairly disadvantaged hits even harder here.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, sometimes it's not even intentional. These biases can creep into how managers work even without them realizing it. So as we're all trying to build truly inclusive workplaces, at really getting this is crucial.
For sure. So that's exactly what we're doing in this deep dive.
Mhm.
We're going deep on how the setup to fail thing works, what it looks like on the ground, what the legal side of it is, and most importantly, how to actually prevent it. And we're doing it all with your need for a fast but thorough understanding in mind.
You got it. So let's start with how it plays out. This setup to fail syndrome often follows a pattern. The manager starts doubting an employee and then they start watching them more closely, maybe even micromanaging them. And the employee might react by pulling back or going into overdrive, which sadly just confirms the manager's initial worries. And then the employee feels trapped and eventually just gives up.
Yeah, I can see that. And you know what's really interesting, what the sources pointed to, is that a lot of times this whole thing starts with managers making these negative assumptions about certain employees.
Yeah.
They might see them as less motivated, less capable of coming up with new ideas. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. It's fascinating how even a simple miscommunication or having different ways of working can trigger this whole thing. But then there's also the flip side where it's totally deliberate. These tactics are straight up workplace bullying designed to make someone fail.
And the examples are pretty shocking when you think about it. Someone gets swamped with an impossible workload, or they're denied the resources or authority they need to do their job, or they're kept in the dark about key information, given crazy deadlines, even left out of important meetings. And the goal, sometimes it's as simple as pushing someone to quit or building a case to fire them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And in South Africa, this setup to fail thing is tied in very closely with the huge problem of workplace bullying. There are specific bullying behaviors that can lead to that feeling. You know, constantly criticizing someone, singling them out unfairly, making sure they're going to fail on purpose, even using their workload as punishment.
Yeah, and those examples really paint the picture, don't they?
Yeah.
Deliberately holding back important information, messing with deadlines by changing them all the time, giving someone tasks that are either way too easy or way too hard without any support. It's clear how that can make someone feel like they're doomed to fail.
Absolutely. And there's a really interesting case, the Center for Autism Research case, which is a strong legal example. The court basically said that a toxic work environment created by bullying can be a reason for constructive dismissal. They recognize that those conditions can make it impossible to stay in the job. It's very much like being set up to fail.
Right. And even without any malicious intent, sometimes it's the performance management practices that are the problem. Unclear expectations, unrealistic targets, lack of proper guidance or resources. It can hit new employees especially hard when they're being compared to seasoned staff without enough support. South African labor law is really clear that performance standards have to be realistic and communicated clearly.
Absolutely. Which leads us to the legal side of things. You know, if an employer is intentionally creating a situation where someone is going to fail, that can actually be considered an unfair labor practice under the LRA. That's the Labor Relations Act. And if it's based on protected grounds like race or gender, it could even be unfair discrimination under the EEA, the Employment Equity Act. Now, the word bullying isn't specifically defined in the law, but it is recognized as a form of harassment. And the CCMA, the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation, and Arbitration, they're the ones who help resolve these disputes.
And this is where the idea of constructive dismissal comes in. It's a really important concept. If the employer makes the working conditions so unbearable that the employee feels they have no choice but to resign, the law can view that as the employer actually dismissing the employee. And like you mentioned, the employee has to prove certain things. And the Center for Autism Research case is a great illustration of that. Employers have a real duty to create a safe and fair working environment. And if they don't, there could be serious financial consequences.
And something else to think about is the connection between being set up to fail and bullying itself. It's often a tactic that's used when there's an imbalance of power, and for the employee, it takes a real toll. It can really erode their confidence and motivation. And what's sad is that feeling of being treated unfairly can sometimes lead to the employee doing things like withholding information or even sabotaging work. It's a way of trying to regain some control.
So how can businesses actually stop this from happening? What are the key things they need to do?
Being proactive is key. HR really needs to step up and make sure the recruitment process is fair and transparent, and that onboarding is thorough. It's about setting clear expectations from the start and giving new hires the support they need. Effective performance management is also super important. That means having clear, measurable standards, regular feedback that's actually helpful, and maybe most importantly, training managers. How to communicate well, how to lead fairly, how to spot those unconscious biases, and how to prevent bullying and harassment, but also creating a work culture that's positive and respectful. Open communication, clear policies, a way for people to raise concerns easily, and programs that support employee well-being, all of that can make a huge difference.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, and it's clear that this setup to fail thing is a serious problem in South Africa. It has real consequences for the people involved and for businesses too.
Uh-huh.
And it can happen in a couple of ways, either through unintentional mistakes by managers or through deliberate bullying.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, the best way to stop it from happening is to have a proactive HR strategy and a supportive workplace culture where everyone feels included and valued. That's how you create an environment where people can actually succeed.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. It really makes you think about the subtle ways these things can play out in the workplace and what we can all do to create a better, more equitable environment. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt this way at work? What strategies have you seen work to prevent it? Let us know in the comments. And remember, together, we can create a work world where everyone has a real shot at success.